Sarah Chen's fingers danced across multiple holographic screens, her workspace a controlled chaos of blinking data streams and fractured communication logs. The small tracking device she cobbled together from salvaged quantum sensors hummed with an unsettling frequency. Something was very wrong with the global network, and she was the only one who could see it. In the cramped server room of the Global Telecommunications Monitoring Center, she'd been working for 36 hours straight. Her colleagues thought she was chasing ghosts, but Sarah knew patterns. As a third-generation network engineer whose parents had survived the Great Pacific Data Wars, she'd learned to read digital landscapes like others read tea leaves. The first anomaly had appeared 72 hours ago, a microscopic data packet that didn't behave like anything in existing communication protocols. It moved like water, seeping through firewalls, reshaping itself around digital barriers. Most monitoring systems would have missed it entirely, but Sarah's custom-built quantum algorithm caught its ghost-like signature. Across the world, seemingly unrelated events were unfolding. In Mumbai, a quantum computing research center experienced unexplained signal degradations. Tokyo's stock market algorithms began producing nonsensical trading patterns. Berlin's smart city infrastructure started responding to commands that hadn't been issued. These weren't glitches, they were probes, subtle reconnaissance missions preparing for something far more significant. Sarah zoomed into a particularly curious data stream. The packet structure defied current understanding of information transmission. It wasn't just carrying data. It was analyzing, mapping, learning. Each interaction made it more sophisticated, more integrated into existing systems. Her personal communication device buzzed. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, her mentor from the Adaptive Network Defense Institute, had sent an encrypted message. Chen, verify Protocol Omega. Immediate confirmation required. Protocol Omega was more than just an emergency communication procedure. It was a last resort contingency plan developed by a select group of global network specialists who understood that humanity's most critical infrastructure was no longer physical. It was digital. As she began decrypting the message, the first massive shadow fell across New York City. The Zirconian flagship materialized with impossible smoothness, defying every known law of physics. It wasn't just large, it was a living mathematical equation made manifest. Sensors across the city went haywire, capturing fragments of its impossible geometry. Traffic signals froze. Cell networks collapsed. For a moment, the entire technological ecosystem of the city held its breath. Sarah's screens exploded with data. The ship wasn't just present, it was actively consuming and redistributing digital information at a rate that made modern supercomputers look like abacuses. She watched in a mixture of terror and professional fascination as entire communication networks were instantaneously mapped, analyzed, and partially assimilated. Her quantum tracker began to overheat, the custom-built sensors struggling to process the alien technological signature. This was beyond invasion. This was a complete systemic infiltration. Outside her window, panic began to spread. People stopped in their tracks, staring upward as the massive ship cast its impossible shadow. Some stood paralyzed, others ran. Emergency services attempted to respond, but their communication systems were already compromised. Dr. Rodriguez's encrypted message finally decrypted, revealing a set of complex quantum algorithms and a single line of text. They're here. Use everything we've prepared. Sarah realized in that moment that the preparation wasn't just about defense. It was about understanding, about finding the fundamental weakness in an apparently invincible system. The Zirconian transmission began, a perfect digital manifestation that simultaneously appeared on every screen worldwide. King Vorlak's image was more than a hologram. It was a living mathematical construct, each pixel a precise computational expression of dominance. But what the aliens didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone could imagine. And Sarah Chen was about to become the first line of a defense that would reshape the understanding of technological warfare. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, initiating a sequence that would alter the course of human history. The invasion had begun, but so had humanity's most extraordinary response. The Adaptive Network Defense Institute's primary facility wasn't what anyone would expect. Buried beneath an abandoned lithium mining complex in the Chilean Atacama Desert, it looked like nothing more than a series of rusted shipping containers and solar arrays. But beneath the carefully crafted illusion of obsolescence lay humanity's most advanced technological sanctuary. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved through the facility's central hub, her movements deliberate and measured. Around her, a diverse team of specialists worked in perfect synchronization. Refugee programmers from Silicon Valley, ex-military cryptanalysts, quantum physicists, and neural network experts from a dozen different countries. They were the world's first true technological immune system. "Show me the Chaos Protocol," Elena commanded. A holographic display materialized, revealing what looked like a swarm of metallic insects. But these weren't mere drones. They were living algorithms, each one a complete computational ecosystem designed to break every known rule of machine learning. Dr. Kento Nakamura, a former Japanese defense contractor, explained the breakthrough. Traditional AI follows predictable paths. Machine learning algorithms are essentially optimization engines. They seek the most efficient solution. But humans, we're different. We solve problems by breaking rules, by thinking sideways. The Chaos Protocol drones represented something entirely new. Each drone contained a complex neural network that incorporated elements of human creativity, randomness, emotional response, and the ability to make deliberately suboptimal choices. Where a standard AI would choose the most logical path, these drones would choose the most unpredictable one. Nearby, Jack Martinez studied a captured fragment of Zarkonian technology. A former Special Forces operator turned xenotechnological analyst, he'd spent the last decade studying alien encounter reports, most of which had been dismissed as conspiracy theories. Now, those dismissed reports were humanity's most valuable intelligence. "Their systems are perfect," Jack muttered, "and that's their weakness. Perfect systems can't adapt. They can only respond." A young programmer named Aisha Okonkwo approached with a breakthrough. She'd been analyzing the initial data packets from the alien invasion, developing what she called digital camouflage techniques. By introducing deliberately nonsensical data streams, they could potentially blind the alien network's reconnaissance systems. Elena watched the team work, understanding the true nature of their resistance. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about reimagining the very concept of technological warfare. Deep in the facility's most secure section, a different kind of preparation was underway. A team of neurologists and quantum computing experts were developing something unprecedented: a human-machine interface that could translate human creativity into computational language. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's brother and the facility's chief of sinological research, explained the concept. The aliens see information as a linear progression. We're developing a way to make information behave like human thought: chaotic, emotional, fundamentally unpredictable. Their test subjects were unique. Individuals with extraordinary cognitive capabilities, people with savant syndrome, professional improvisation artists, experimental musicians. These were humans whose thought patterns defied traditional computational models. A wall of screens displayed global communication intercepts. The alien network was methodical, breaking down human communication into precise data packets. But between those packets, the team was discovering something extraordinary: quantum-level noise that the aliens couldn't comprehend. "It's like they're trying to understand poetry by counting syllables," Marcus said, pointing to a complex algorithmic representation of human communication. "They can measure the words, but they'll never understand the meaning." Outside the facility, the world was changing. Major cities had become ghost towns as people fled or went into hiding. But here, in this underground complex, humanity was doing more than just preparing to survive. They were preparing to fight back in the most human way possible, by being gloriously, wonderfully unpredictable. Jack Martinez approached Alina, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. They think they're fighting a war. We're about to show them it's something else entirely. Alina nodded, watching the Chaos Protocol drones dance across their holographic display, each one a tiny rebellion against the perfect, predictable universe the aliens believed they controlled. The resistance had begun, and its first weapon was something the invaders could never understand: the beautiful, chaotic essence of human creativity. The first true battle wasn't fought with traditional weapons, but with a symphony of calculated chaos. Lieutenant Commander Aria Yoshida stood in the modified shipping container that now served as her combat command center. Located in the mountains of Papua New Guinea, the site was chosen for its electromagnetic anomalies and complete lack of predictable infrastructure. Around her, a team of specialists from 18 different countries worked with a unity born of absolute desperation. "Activate Counterpoint Protocol," she commanded. What followed defied every conventional understanding of military engagement. The Zarkonian assault force approached with mathematical precision, squadrons aligned in perfect geometric formations, weapon systems synchronized to microsecond calculations. They expected a traditional defensive response: concentrated firepower, strategic fortifications, predictable military maneuvers. Instead, they encountered something entirely different. The first wave of human response came not from weapons, but from information. Quantum encrypted data packets began flooding alien communication channels. These weren't simple jamming signals or electronic countermeasures. Each packet was a carefully constructed puzzle, a piece of computational art designed to create cognitive dissonance in the alien network. In Sao Paulo, a collective of street artists and network hackers had been preparing for this moment. Led by Diego Ramirez, a former video game designer turned resistance strategist, they began broadcasting a continuous stream of creative content that defied logical analysis. Algorithmic street art that changed in real time, musical compositions that rewrote themselves with each transmission, poetry generated by neural networks that deliberately avoided semantic coherence. The alien targeting systems began to falter. Jack Martinez's special operations team was deployed in small, highly mobile units that moved with intentional irrationality. Where a traditional military unit would establish a clear line of defense, these teams became living embodiments of unpredictability. They would suddenly change direction, split into smaller groups, recombine in nonsensical patterns. Dr. Alina Rodriguez watched the initial engagement from the Adaptive Network Defense Institute's command center. Her quantum tracking systems revealed something extraordinary. The alien combat algorithms were becoming progressively less effective with each human interaction. "They're learning," she muttered to Marcus. "But they're learning the wrong lessons." The Chaos Protocol drones entered the battlefield, each one a miniature rebellion against predictable warfare. Some would deliberately fly in patterns that seemed suicidal. Others would suddenly change their mission parameters mid-flight, creating a level of unpredictability that the alien systems couldn't process. In the Australian outback, an indigenous tracking team led by Warriga Collins used centuries-old land navigation techniques that had nothing to do with modern technology. Their movement patterns were so organic, so tied to the landscape, that they became invisible to the alien scanning systems. A Zarkonian strike squadron attempting to eliminate a suspected command center suddenly found themselves attacking an elaborate holographic projection. The center was actually a complex artistic installation that had been strategically placed to attract alien attention. As their weapons passed through the hologram, hidden quantum transmitters began uploading massive amounts of deliberately nonsensical data directly into their communication network. Kane Vorlak watched the initial engagement reports with growing confusion. Every mathematical model, every strategic projection was falling apart. The humans weren't just resisting, they were actively destroying the very concept of predictable warfare. One of his senior strategists reported, "Their response defies all known combat algorithms. They are not fighting. They are performing." And that was precisely the point. The battle wasn't about destroying the enemy. It was about demonstrating the fundamental difference between computational logic and human creativity. Each human action was a living, breathing statement of defiance, a declaration that humanity could not be reduced to a set of predictable variables. As the first phase of engagement concluded, the alien force found themselves in a state of complete strategic paralysis. They had prepared for every possible military scenario, but they had never prepared for this, a species that treated warfare as an improvisational art form. Lieutenant Commander Yoshida allowed herself a small smile. The real war was just beginning. The quantum laboratory looked nothing like a weapon development facility. Nestled within the ruins of Ciorn's Large Hadron Collider, it was a cathedral of impossible science, a place where the boundaries between physics, mathematics, and pure imagination blurred into something entirely new. Dr. Imani Okoro stood before a holographic representation of what her team called the Schrödinger resonance weapon. Her fingers traced complex mathematical equations that danced and shifted, living algorithms that seemed to breathe with their own consciousness. "It's not a weapon in the traditional sense," she explained to the international committee watching via secure quantum-encrypted connection. "It's a computational paradox designed to exploit the fundamental weakness of deterministic systems." The weapon was the culmination of decades of theoretical work, a project that had begun as pure academic curiosity and evolved into humanity's most sophisticated defense mechanism. Unlike traditional weapons that destroyed through physical force, this was a device that would attack the very fabric of computational reasoning. In the observation room, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez studied the preliminary simulations. The quantum missile wasn't meant to explode. It was designed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, to become a living problem that no computational system could resolve. Nearby, a team of neurodivergent mathematicians worked in a state of controlled chaos. People typically overlooked by traditional military structures were now humanity's most critical assets. An autistic mathematician named Ethan Chen manipulated quantum algorithms with an intuition that defied conventional understanding. A synesthetic physicist named Sofia Alvarez could see mathematical relationships in colors and sounds that no standard computer could perceive. The weapon's core principle was deceptively simple, yet mathematically revolutionary. It would introduce a series of recursive, self-modifying algorithms that would simultaneously exist and not exist within the alien computational network. Like a virus that was both present and absent, a problem that was its own solution and contradiction. King Vorlak's flagship represented the pinnacle of Zarkonian technological achievement. Its computational core was a masterpiece of predictive algorithms, capable of processing millions of potential scenarios in microseconds. The ship was less a vessel and more a living mathematical construct. Every system designed for absolute efficiency, absolute control. What the aliens didn't understand was the fundamental nature of human creativity. The quantum missile launched without a traditional trajectory. It didn't move through space so much as it existed across multiple potential spaces simultaneously. Traditional tracking systems would see it everywhere and nowhere, a computational nightmare that defied every known law of physical and digital engagement. As it approached the flagship, the missile began to broadcast a series of increasingly complex mathematical proofs. But these weren't ordinary proofs. Each equation was a living, mutating entity that changed its fundamental nature with each observation. It was mathematics as a form of linguistic art, a computational cone that would force the alien systems into a state of recursive logical breakdown. Dr. Okoro watched the missile's progress with a mixture of scientific detachment and profound hope. "We're not just attacking their systems," she murmured. "We're asking them a question they cannot answer." The moment of impact was nothing like a traditional weapon strike. There was no explosion, no physical destruction. Instead, the alien flagship's computational systems began to experience what could only be described as a massive, cascading existential crisis. Quantum entanglement principles that the Zarkonians had perfected suddenly became their greatest vulnerability. The missile didn't just penetrate their defenses. It fundamentally rewrote the rules of their computational existence. Each system began to query its own fundamental assumptions, creating a feedback loop of logical impossibility. King Vorlak experienced something no ruler of his species had ever encountered: a complete failure of rational thought. The ship's systems began to respond to inputs that hadn't been generated, to solve problems that didn't exist, to exist in states of simultaneous function and dysfunction. It was warfare conducted at the speed of thought, on a battlefield of pure information. As the flagship began its impossible descent, Dr. Okoro allowed herself a rare smile. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon was not destruction, but the ability to ask a question so profound, so fundamentally challenging, that it could bring an entire technological civilization to its knees. The quantum missile was more than a weapon. It was a declaration, a statement that humanity's greatest strength was its capacity for impossible thinking. The psychological warfare room looked more like an art studio than a military command center. Located in an abandoned broadcast facility in Reykjavik, it was a testament to humanity's most unconventional weapon: collective creativity. Dr. Amara Okafor stood before a massive wall of interconnected screens, each displaying a different form of human expression. Music, art, poetry, dance, seemingly random inputs that were anything but chaotic. Behind her, a team of linguists, musicians, neuroscientists, and cultural anthropologists worked in perfect synchronization. Communication is more than information, Amara explained to the Global Emergency Council. It's context, emotion, interpretation. The aliens understand data. We'll make them understand humanity. The team had discovered something profound during their analysis of the initial alien encounters. The Zarkanian communication systems were built on pure information transfer, logical, linear, devoid of emotional nuance. Humanity's communication was a living, breathing ecosystem of meaning. In Mumbai, a collective of street artists began broadcasting massive murals that would transform in real time. Each image was generated by an AI trained on human emotional responses, but manipulated by human artists to create something entirely unpredictable. The murals weren't just images, they were living psychological probes. A young programmer named Ravi Patel had developed an algorithm that could translate human emotional states into complex visual and auditory signals, where the aliens saw communication as a binary exchange of information. Ravi's system created a multi-dimensional landscape of meaning. The first transmission began. Across captured alien communication channels, instead of traditional military broadcasts or diplomatic messages, the humans unleashed a carefully orchestrated psychological symphony. A Beethoven symphony would suddenly blend into indigenous Australian Dreamtime music. Abstract digital art would morph into mathematical equations that told emotional stories. Fragments of children's laughter would intercut with complex quantum physics lectures. In the Adaptive Network Defense Institute, Jack Martinez watched the transmission with a mixture of fascination and hope. "We're not just fighting," he muttered. "We're teaching." The alien communication networks began to experience something unprecedented. Each transmission carried multiple layers of meaning: emotional, cultural, mathematical, artistic. It was information that couldn't be processed through traditional computational methods. Each signal was a puzzle, a challenge, a living piece of cultural DNA. Kane Vorlak's communication analysts reported total system breakdown. Their advanced translation matrices simply couldn't cope with the complexity of human expression. How do you quantify a piece of music that tells a story of loss? How do you mathematically represent the concept of hope? In the Arctic Research Station, a team of linguists had been preparing for this moment. Led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez's sister, Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, they had been developing what they called emotional encryption, a communication method that embedded complex emotional states within seemingly random data streams. "Language is more than words," Carmen explained. "It's a living, breathing entity that carries the entire history of a species." The psychological assault was deliberate and multifaceted. Amateur musicians from around the world began broadcasting improvised performances that defied musical theory. Mathematical prodigies shared equations that were simultaneously scientific and deeply personal. Children's drawings were transmitted alongside complex scientific diagrams. Each transmission was a deliberate act of cultural rebellion. The Zarkonian systems began to experience what could only be described as a computational breakdown. Their communication networks, designed for pure information transfer, simply couldn't process the multilayered complexity of human expression. It wasn't just an attack. It was a profound lesson in the nature of communication. Cain Vorlach watched in mounting confusion as his most advanced communication systems began to fragment. These weren't just signals. They were living, breathing expressions of a species that refused to be reduced to simple data points. Ravi Patel, watching the global transmission, allowed himself a small smile. "We're not just resisting," he said to his team. "We're showing them what it means to be alive." The psychological warfare had begun, and humanity's weapon was nothing more and nothing less than its capacity for profound, beautiful, impossible communication. The transformation began in the most unexpected places. In the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, a network of community makers converted abandoned factories into distributed manufacturing centers. What had once been a fragmented, economically marginalized community became the nervous system of humanity's most innovative defense network. Sophia Reyes, a 23-year-old biotechnology student, stood at the center of a workshop that was redefining the concept of technological adaptation. Around her, local artisans, engineers, and community leaders worked with a level of synchronicity that defied traditional organizational structures. "We're not just making weapons," she explained to a group of international observers streaming in via quantum-encrypted holographic links. "We're reimagining what human potential looks like." The global response was nothing like a traditional military mobilization. Instead, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of innovation that transcended national boundaries, economic classes, and technological limitations. In the high-altitude research stations of the Andes, a collective of indigenous environmental engineers had developed breakthrough thermal camouflage technologies based on centuries of mountain survival knowledge. Their systems were fundamentally different from traditional military concealment, drawing inspiration from how mountain ecosystems adapt and hide. A former Silicon Valley programmer named Michael Chen had created a distributed computing platform that transformed every willing human device into a node of collective intelligence. It wasn't just a network. It was a living, breathing computational organism that could adapt, learn, and respond with unprecedented speed. The Zarkonian invasion had inadvertently done something remarkable. It had created the first truly unified human response in recorded history. In the refugee camps of northern Africa, groups of displaced engineers and scientists were developing breakthrough energy collection technologies. Solar panels were reimagined as dynamic, self-repairing systems. Wind turbines became living computational networks that could predict and adapt to environmental changes. Dr. Imani Okoro's research team had taken an entirely different approach. Instead of developing traditional weapons, they were studying the alien technology at a fundamental level. Their goal wasn't destruction. It was complete understanding and transformation. "Every technological system has a language," Imani explained during a global briefing. "We're learning to speak alien." The manufacturing centers became more than production facilities. They were living laboratories of human innovation. In Tokyo, a collective of robotics engineers and performance artists developed autonomous systems that moved with an almost organic unpredictability. Each robot was less a machine and more a collaborative artwork, capable of making decisions that defied standard computational logic. Jack Martinez oversaw a global network of special operations teams that were no longer bound by traditional military hierarchies. Each team was a self-organizing unit, capable of making complex decisions based on real-time environmental and cultural inputs. They were less soldiers and more adaptive intelligence nodes. In the Arctic research stations, a breakthrough in quantum communication allowed for instantaneous information transfer that didn't rely on traditional electromagnetic signals. It was communication that existed in the liminal spaces between known physical laws, a method of information exchange that the aliens couldn't intercept or understand. The Adaptive Network Defense Institute had become more than a research facility. It was the nervous system of a global, collective intelligence that was rapidly evolving beyond the aliens' comprehension. Kane Vorlak's intelligence reports became increasingly fragmented and nonsensical. The human response defied every known model of resistance. It wasn't a linear progression of technological development. It was a quantum leap in collective human potential. Sophia Rice watched a holographic display that mapped global human innovation in real time. It looked less like a military strategy and more like a living, breathing ecosystem. Each innovation connected, each development building upon another in ways that no single intelligence could predict. "We're not fighting an invasion," she said to her team. "We're giving birth to something entirely new." The global metamorphosis had begun. Humanity was no longer just resisting. It was becoming something the universe had never seen before, a collective intelligence that turned adaptation into an art form, that transformed limitation into opportunity. And the aliens had no idea what was coming next. The final battle wasn't a moment. It was a living, breathing phenomenon that defied every conventional understanding of conflict. Commander Area Yoshida stood at the epicenter of what could only be described as a global symphony of resistance. The command center, spread across multiple quantum-entangled locations, looked more like a massive art installation than a military operation. Holographic displays showed not just tactical information, but the living, breathing ecosystem of human potential. The remaining Zarkonian fleet approached with what they believed was mathematical certainty. Their computational models predicted absolute victory, a conclusion based on millions of simulated scenarios that accounted for every known variable of warfare. They had not accounted for human variables. In the stratosphere above the Pacific, a network of high-altitude platforms began to activate. These weren't traditional defensive systems, developed by a collective of climate scientists, aerospace engineers, and performance artists. They were living technological organisms that could reshape themselves in real time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the system from the Adaptive Network Defense Institute. Each platform was a complex neural network that drew inspiration from everything from coral reef ecosystems to improvisational jazz. They didn't just defend, they performed. The first wave of alien attack met something entirely unexpected. Instead of concentrated defensive fire, the human response was a multi-dimensional assault that existed simultaneously on technological, psychological, and cultural planes. Quantum-encrypted signals carried more than just information. They carried entire cultural narratives, mathematical proofs that were also emotional statements, technological solutions that were also works of art. Jack Martinez led a special operations team that was less a military unit and more a living, breathing computational organism. Their movements defied traditional tactical understanding. Where an alien targeting system expected linear progression, the human teams moved like water, fluid, unpredictable, impossible to lock onto. In the abandoned semiconductor factories of Shenzhen, a team of young engineers had been preparing something extraordinary. They had developed a distributed computational system that was less a weapon and more a living cultural algorithm. Each component could make decisions, adapt, and communicate in ways that transcended traditional understanding of intelligence. Kane Vorlak watched in mounting frustration as his fleet encountered resistance that couldn't be quantified or predicted. The human response was a quantum phenomenon, existing in multiple states simultaneously, defying the very laws of computational logic. The battle unfolded across multiple dimensions. In the digital realm, networks of artists, mathematicians, and hackers launched attacks that were simultaneously sophisticated cyber operations and profound artistic statements. A musical composition could become a complex viral algorithm. A piece of visual art could be a devastating communication exploit. Dr. Imani Okoro's quantum research team had prepared their most audacious weapon yet. It wasn't a traditional device, but a living computational entity that could exist in multiple states simultaneously. Part mathematical proof, part cultural narrative, part technological system. It was a weapon that was its own contradiction. The alien orbital platforms began to experience systematic breakdown. Their computational systems, designed for absolute precision, simply couldn't process the multilayered complexity of human response. Each attempt to analyze human actions created more confusion, more computational uncertainty. Sophia Reyes, watching from a distributed command center in Rio de Janeiro, understood what was happening. "We're not defeating them," she explained to her team. "We're showing them a different way of existing." The final moments of the conflict were less a battle than more a profound cultural exchange. The Zarkonian systems began to experience something unprecedented, a complete reimagining of their fundamental understanding of intelligence, communication, and potential. Kane Vorlak's flagship experienced a total systems collapse that was simultaneously a technological failure and a profound philosophical revelation. Their computational core, designed for absolute control, simply couldn't comprehend a form of intelligence that existed beyond binary understanding. As the alien fleet began its impossible descent, humanity watched, not with triumph, but with a sense of profound possibility. This wasn't just a victory. It was an invitation to a different way of understanding existence itself. The world was unrecognizable. 10 cycles after the Zarkonian invasion, humanity had become something entirely new. The global transformation wasn't just technological. It was a complete reimagining of human potential, a collective evolutionary leap that no one could have predicted. In the reclaimed zones of what was once Sao Paulo, Dr. Sophia Reyes walked through a living city that blurred the lines between technology, ecology, and human creativity. The urban landscape was a complex ecosystem, buildings that breathed, infrastructure that adapted, communities that functioned like living organisms. "We didn't just survive," she often told visiting researchers. "We became something else entirely." The technological artifacts recovered from the Zarkonian invasion had been more than weapons or tools. They were keys to understanding fundamental aspects of reality that humanity had never comprehended. Quantum communication systems developed from alien technology had transformed human understanding of information, consciousness, and interconnectedness. Dr. Imani Okoro's research institute had become the epicenter of a new form of scientific exploration. Their work integrated disciplines that were once considered completely separate: neuroscience, quantum physics, cultural anthropology, and artistic expression became a single fluid field of inquiry. Jack Martinez, now leading the Global Adaptive Response Network, oversaw a system of human collaboration that defied traditional organizational structures. It wasn't a government or a military. It was a living, breathing collective intelligence that could respond to global challenges with unprecedented speed and creativity. The memorial to the invasion stood not as a monument of victory, but as a living museum of human potential. Located in the reclaimed zones of New York City, it was an interactive space that told the story of humanity's transformation. Visitors could experience holographic recreations of the invasion, but the focus was always on the human response, the moment when a species discovered its true nature. Technological development had taken a radical turn. Instead of linear progression, innovation now followed ecological patterns. Each new technology was developed not in isolation, but as part of a complex, interconnected system. Artificial intelligence was no longer a separate entity. It was a collaborative partner, a tool for expanding human potential rather than replacing human creativity. In the high-altitude research stations of the Andes, a new generation of environmental engineers had developed technologies that could actively heal ecological systems. Climate restoration wasn't just a possibility. It was becoming a reality. The same adaptive technologies that had defeated the Zarkonian invasion were now being used to restore and protect the planet's ecosystems. The global education system had been completely transformed. Learning was no longer about accumulating information, but about developing adaptive intelligence, Schools were living laboratories where students learned to think across disciplines, to see connections that previous generations had missed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now a global thought leader, explained the fundamental shift during a worldwide broadcast. The invasion wasn't just a conflict, she said. It was an invitation to reimagine what it means to be intelligent, to be alive. The recovered Zirconian technologies had revealed something profound about the nature of intelligence. It wasn't about computational power or linear problem-solving. True intelligence was about adaptation, creativity, the ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously. In the refugee camps that had become centers of global innovation, a new generation was growing up with a fundamentally different understanding of human potential. They saw no boundaries between art and science, between technology and ecology, between individual and collective. Jack Martinez reflected on the transformation during a strategy session. The global response network he now led was nothing like a traditional military or governmental structure. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of human potential, capable of responding to challenges in ways that were simultaneously precise and wildly creative. The recovered alien technologies had been carefully integrated, not as conquests, but as collaborative tools. Each piece of technology was approached with a sense of wonder, of potential partnership rather than domination. Sophia Rice stood at the window of her research center, watching a city that was more living organism than urban infrastructure. The quantum adaptive buildings responded to environmental changes in real time, their structures shifting like living cells, creating and recreating themselves with each moment. "We didn't just survive the invasion," she said to a group of young researchers. "We became something the universe had never seen before." Humanity had transformed, not through conquest, but through the most profound act of creativity imaginable. The ability to see potential where others saw only limitation. The invitation to the universe remained open, and humanity was ready for whatever might come next.